if I'm going to be running out of time, just let me know. And if I have a bit of extra time, I'm more than happy to use it. So just let me know when I should be finishing, okay?
Will do, yeah. So roughly you've got 20 minutes, but I'll let you know when you're about 3 minutes,
Okay, thank you.
2 minutes, but yeah, we'll kind of see where you're up to.
Okay.
But yes, take it away, Sylwia.
Okay, so I'm gonna, okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a bit of context, and I have a couple of notes. So I'm going to start off with reading a couple of things just to kind of be brief and on point. So basically, I would like to kind of show you how I feel my current research is fitting with the notion of power. And the thing is that I am now researching the impact of Netflix on Poland's audiovisual production industry. And when I saw the call for papers, I felt that it very strongly resonates with my work, as of course the issue of power is very often associated with Netflix's global presence. And at the very beginning, I would like to say two things to sort of position the talk that I'm giving today. So first of all, what I'm talking about is still kind of like work in progress, and the research I'm currently doing is for an article for European Journal of Cultural Studies. And the other important thing is to briefly say how I interpret or how I use the notion of power and how I investigate power in Polish television. Because the thing is that I mainly look at the practitioner discourse, and I have been researching Poland's creative industry for many years now. And actually, I started researching how Poland's practitioners work for my PhD thesis. But at the time, there was no Netflix. So in a way, what I'm doing now stems from my PhD research, which was focused on legacy broadcasters in Poland. So basically, I look at this sort of like practitioner context when researching Netflix. And this is also my entry point for the discussion of power in television. So basically, when talking about power or thinking about power in television, I basically look at what influences the daily work of television creative talent. I look at what powerful sources determine how the creative work is being done and what impacts the actual TV texts that later make it to either the broadcasting schedules or more often the streaming services. And ultimately, I look at power struggles within cultural production for television, trying to understand why people in the Polish industry work the way they do on daily basis, and also why they create in the ways they do. And obviously, in order to understand this a particular dynamic of power that basically underlines the creative process, I look at the internal struggles within Polish audiovisual industry, and I kind of consider this sort of internal struggle between EU policy, so institutional governance. I look at corporate business of streamers, such as Netflix, for example, but in Poland we now have others as well, such as Sky Showtime, Max, etc. I look at local unions and their bargaining power. And basically, I look at how this power dynamic plays off and influences the actual daily lives of Polish practitioners. I also look at how Poland fits into global media flows. And as Poland is obviously considered a peripheral market when you look at this ratio of export and import. And here in this instance, I could use Brett Mill's term invisible fiction, because Polish fiction is almost never exported, right? So Poland as a market is historically based or function as an importing country. So we are buying shows from abroad, or we've done so historically, right? And one other level on which I consider power struggles in Poland is also the taste culture. So I try to figure out and I try to investigate what Polish practitioners consider good television, what impacts their work in the creative process. And this obviously is something that incorporates looking at audiences or critics as well, right? So I basically look at what powers influence this emerging taste culture in the Polish industry more generally. So I basically look at all these factors when researching Netflix. And initially, for my talk, I wanted to focus exclusively on Netflix. But then it kind of occurred to me that everything we could say about Netflix in Poland, to some extent, has already been happening in Poland since the very inception of television in Poland. As Poland historically, in different phases at different times, have been under the influence of very powerful forces that came from maybe different places, but there have always been some external international powerful forces at play. So in a way, in order to understand what's happening excuse me, in the creative industry in Poland, when it comes to Netflix's impact, we kind of have to take a step back and actually look at how a Polish TV market has been developing. So in the first part of my presentation, I just very briefly want to share with you how I interpret or how I divide Poland's TV history so that we can arrive at the here and now. And I strongly believe that this very brief discussion of where we come from as an industry, it will impact our understanding of what is happening here and now with Netflix's arrival in Poland. But also one more thing that I want to emphasize is that in my research and also my today's presentation is focusing solely on TV scripted programming. So the phases of the development of Polish TV industry that I'm going to be discussing are made or devised based on what has... Sorry.
Is going off. I'm just checking if we need to leave. Bear with me. Oh no, it was. I think it's.
Rita, should I continue?
Yeah, it was just a test. Sorry, it doesn't matter. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So ultimately, I just want to make clear that my today's talk, but also my broader research, focuses specifically on TV scripted programming. So television series and increasingly movies made for television as well, because Netflix is investing heavily for films as well. So just to kind of give you this background of what has been happening in Poland, we kind of have to start with the sort of socialist period. So the whole history as of 1950s in Poland up until early 1990s, it was a period where Poland was strongly influenced by this external power, which was obviously the Soviet paradigm. And I here don't want to be discussing those particular periods in detail, but I just want to kind of hint that in this period, Poland operated under strong influence of this external player, right? And what were sort of main characteristics of this period? Well, there was no or very little Western programming, because shows that were imported mainly came from the Soviet Union or mainly Russia, right? And in a way, this censorship and this Soviet propaganda and the fact that television was politically steered at the time obviously had huge impact on practitioners working within this politically controlled environment. And I don't actually focus in my research on this pre-1989 period, but I think it is worth mentioning that since the very inception of Polish television, there has always been some international force at play. And we could think, and we could think that it all changed with the fall of communism, right, in 1989. We could assume that finally Polish practitioners had the freedom, right, to just create whatever they wanted, right, because Poland finally got freed economically, politically from this influence of the Soviet Union. However, when we look at what was happening in Poland in the TV industry in the 1990s, we will see that it wasn't really the case because simply another sort of foreign superpower came in and dominated the market. And in, Okay, and in the 1990s, the dominating power in the Polish TV industry were American distribution companies, right? Because here you can see a sample schedule for a week in 1998. And what is striking about these three figures is that the majority of TV fiction in this particular week, which is actually very representative what was happening at the time on like weekly and yearly basis. So what is striking is that the TV fiction on Polish TV screens was dominated by American product, right? Because there was very little, close to none actually, of local programming, of local TV fiction or TV series, right? And this is understandable if we look at those historical continuities. When Poland got freed of the Soviet paradigm, well, we as a country, we didn't have production companies, infrastructure. We didn't have a lot of practitioners who could actually produce in bulk a lot of programming, right? Because in the 1990s, the Polish main legacy broadcaster transformed into TVP, which you can see on the left-hand side, but also 1990s saw the emergence of two commercial broadcasters, Polsat and TVN, right? And we can see that Polsat and TVN simply didn't have the resources to produce locally. So actually both these commercial broadcasters as well as now public service broadcaster, they just simply had to import programming to fill their schedules, right? There was no money, no knowledge, no infrastructure to produce local TV fiction. So in this period, in the 1990s, Poland as an industry was dominated by American product, right? So in a way, this Soviet influence was replaced by American influence in the form of imported programming. And this dominance of American product lasted up until roughly 2010. Here you can see the analysis, my own analysis of TV schedules, which demonstrates that the replacement of imported American product with local TV fiction has been very gradual, and the dominance of local TV fiction kind of like cemented roughly around 2010. But even maybe we could be impressed by this high number of local fiction, say in the year 2010, but the like closer analysis revealed yet another sort of power struggle within Polish industry, because my analysis of the Polish output in terms of TV fiction, roughly around 2010, revealed that this period was dominated by yet another sort of powerful force. And this time, these were American companies, American or other international companies, selling licenses for local format adaptations. And this period, which in my sort of analysis demonstrates local fiction, it was in fact to a large extent constituted by local adaptations of American or other formats, right? So even though we gradually had a sudden increase, maybe gradual, but a very impressive increase of local fiction, underlying processes demonstrate that still Polish production was under a huge influence of these American or other companies just selling rights or IP rights for local adaptations. And a good example here is Polish adaptation of Everybody Loves Raymond. We also had a Polish adaptation of American sitcom The Nanny, and we had many others, right? I don't want to go into too much detail because my talk is not ultimately about format adaptation, but I just wanted to hint that even though we had this impressive amount of local fiction being produced, it was still under sort of this powerful paradigm of American or other international companies. Another processes at play when Polish fiction began to be flourishing around the year 2010 is imitation, because Polish producers have been very open about the fact that they were simply watching American fiction and imitating certain genres, certain plots, certain stories, or even production modes to produce their own TV show. And here a good example is Polish show called Lekarze, which was impacted or influenced very strongly by Grey's Anatomy. And this is not kind of me saying that this Polish show is an imitation of Grey's Anatomy is not something that I came up with by doing textual analysis. Far from it. This is something that producers and creatives very openly admitted to, that they said, hey, we really wanted to create a high quality, TV drama about doctors. We never had that in Poland. We don't really know how to write a show like that for television. So we just watched Grey's Anatomy and other American TV shows in order to learn how to sort of write a show like that, what plot twists to include, what characters to create, right? So in a way, whatever I'm saying today is kind of partially driven by what producers and creators, such as writers, say about their work themselves, right? So in a way, even though those processes of format adaptation or program importation might be considered colonial or imperialistic, right? Because this power balance at first glance seem very uneven. But from my conversations with... Sorry?
5 more minutes.
Okay. So basically, Polish practitioners have been very positive about those processes because it helped them to develop their own craft of writing. They helped sort of like watching American shows or imitating them or adapting them, kind of help them produce local fiction and thus learn how to write or produce successful TV shows, right? So in a way, I want to emphasize that these processes are considered quite positive from the perspective of the practitioners themselves. So in a way, I divide the history of Polish television into those 4 different phases with a particular sort of attention paid to the external powerful forces impacting our local industry. So firstly, we had this socialist control. Then in between 1990s and the year 2000, our Polish market was impacted by program importation because we had loads of American shows such as Baywatch. Then sometime between the year 2000 and 2015, we witnessed processes of formatting, which was based not only on non-scripted programming, but also on scripted formatting, so sitcoms and TV dramas, but also this period kind of witnessed this process of imitation. So ultimately, what is happening now, as of 2016, when Netflix entered the Polish market, is not really something new, because I consider this platform imperialism as a continuity of this external powers at play in the Polish industry. And that's why my analysis or my critique of Netflix in Poland is probably slightly less sort of negative, because I also try to see what Polish practitioners are taking from Netflix, how they are benefiting from Netflix's presence in Poland. And the whole sort of this phase that we are in now in Poland started in 2016 when Netflix was launched in Poland, and the first local TV series was produced in 2018. And here on this picture, you see Reed Hastings, who visited Poland in December last year. So you can clearly see that Reed Hastings is sort of courting Polish industry, because he's sort of very, yeah, I think courting is a good word here, because he's sort of like inviting Polish producers, Polish creative talent, right? And sort of encouraging them to basically work for Netflix. And when we look at the map of the region where Poland is placed, so East and Central Europe, you can see that Poland is the biggest country in the region, and Poland is as big as, say, I don't know, Germany, or slightly smaller than France. So you can see why Netflix is sort of courting Poland more than other countries, because simply it's the most important market in the region. And what makes Poland particularly interesting is also the fact that the streaming sector in Poland is not yet saturated. So actually, Poland is the place where streamers can still make more money, right? Because there's still a lot of money to be kind of like made in our market, right? So obviously Netflix is courting Poland because there's still more opportunity for growth as compared to Western European countries, where this growth is slower, right, than in Poland, for example. And obviously, well, Netflix is monopolizing Polish market, right? There's no question about that, because Netflix is producing more than any other legacy broadcaster. Netflix has more money. It has this impressive cash flow that it's basically financing programs, TV shows, and films upfront, which makes the life of producers and creative talent way more pleasant. So in a way, because of their sort of their larger budgets and this impressive production output, Netflix is becoming the main employer in Poland, right? And Netflix.
Wind up now.
Sorry?
You're going to have to conclude now.
Okay, so just yeah, I just have like two more slides, so I'm going to be finishing. So obviously, there's no question about the fact that Poland is being monopolized by Netflix. However, Polish producers are sort of benefiting from Netflix's presence, because they are producing now VFX heavy TV shows, which was never ever possible before. Polish producers are also experimenting with new genres, for example, sci-fi, that is historically very expensive to produce. And in Poland, we never had any sci-fi shows made for television before. Netflix is also allowing for new voices to be heard on television, because Poland is obviously a very sort of non-tolerant country towards, for example, LGBT communities. And Netflix sort of allows Polish practitioners to tell stories about those marginalized communities, and practitioners are very happy about that. And also Netflix allows practitioners to tell stories that wouldn't be able to be told on legacy broadcasters, because obviously the legacy broadcasters are sort of politically steered, right? And in Poland, we have this very strict right-wing conservative government. So Netflix, being sort of outside of that broadcasting sector, is able to tell stories about sex-conscious teenagers, sexually liberated women, or about older aging women who sort of live their lives on their own terms, right? And these stories wouldn't be able to be told on legacy broadcasters ultimately. I'm going to skip the policy bit, and just to briefly sum up, ultimately, the key takeaways from my research on power and Netflix is that Netflix ultimately is like nothing new in certain respects, because Poland has always been under the influence of very strong foreign powers, right? Simply in different periods, those powers kind of changed, but they never went away, right? And this kind of leads me to this sort of question: how can we even theorize what local Polish TV culture is, right? Because it has historically been impacted by foreign forces to a great extent, right? Netflix, many other superpowers sort of came before Netflix, and local Polish industry has always found ways to sort of resist that power and negotiate, right? So despite the fact that Netflix is considered this imperialistic power, Polish practitioners actually feel empowered by Netflix's presence in Poland, right? So maybe on the institutional level, Netflix is this imperialistic power, but when you look at the granular level of the Polish industry, practitioners are happy that Netflix is in Poland and that is kind of investing heavily in Polish products. Thank you very much. Sorry for extending my time. Thank you.
No problem, thank you very much. Okay, so I don't know where Mercy's gone. She was like tapped in for a little bit and then disappeared and hasn't come back. So I'm going to just say, shall we get on with some questions for you, Sylwia, if that's okay? Did you hear me, Sylwia?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Great. Yeah, have you got anything?
Yes, sure. It was absolutely interesting, and it was a very clear and very thoughtful ride across the history of Polish television. It was very fascinating. I loved how you explained how the patterns have changed and the different power dynamics that have been imposing on the TV production. It was really, really interesting. And I wondered, apart from I wondered two things in particular, then I will move on to your questions because I haven't, but anyway. Yeah, that was very, very inspiring. If there was anything that also contributed and allowed for the local TV fiction to rise in the early 2000s. So I was wondering if there were any, I don't know, economic, social, artistic factors that contributed to the production of local, even though, you know, imitating, importing, or adapting foreign formats, especially from the US, if there was something more to explain this change of trend. And then I have a second question if you want to go ahead. But I was wondering how the audiences reacted to these changes from the early 90s to the rise of Netflix, and if you because we have time, I think, I don't know if you focused on that in your research, but I was wondering if audiences reacted positively as much as the practitioners did. So, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. These are great questions, and obviously this is something that I have considered, but I kind of couldn't talk about everything in such a short span of time. But ultimately, my analysis of the market around 2010 simply reveals that what allowed Polish producers or broadcasters to invest in local TV fiction is the fact that, first of all, they knew that Polish audiences want to watch local programming. So in a way, for broadcasting, for linear broadcasters, it is true that the cultural proximity is important because Polish main viewers, right? So non-niche audiences, they simply want to watch local programming. And broadcasters figure that out in the process. And what allowed them to cater to those needs is simply that they earned that they finally had enough money to invest in local TV fiction, because obviously local TV fiction is the most expensive programming to make, right? And it took local broadcasters more than 10 years to actually accumulate enough budgets for producing local TV shows, because they could only broadcast commercials as of late 1990s. So it took them, say, several years to build up functioning business models to start producing sort of in bulk, in a way. But also I think that we as a country, as an industry, we needed time to basically I don't know, we needed time for TV professionals to emerge, that we needed to train them, like because there wasn't that many TV practitioners in the socialist period. So the industry needed to sort of breed their own, new generation of practitioners. So I think this is why it took Poland, I don't know, in between 10 or 20 years to actually start producing or investing in local domestic products. So I feel that these are institutional and also economic reasons for that. And when it comes to audiences, I basically do not research audiences. However, I am aware of what producers conceive, or broadcasters, what they think of their audiences. So in a way, audiences want to watch Polish local TV shows. Basically, producers are aware that Nielsen audience ratings clearly show that it is the Polish shows when they began to be broadcasted, they accumulated the most viewership, and in that period, a Polish TV show was able to garner an audience of between, for commercial broadcasters, it was roughly 4 million viewers per episode. And for the public service broadcaster that broadcasted and produced their daily soaps, it was roughly around 8 million. So the numbers, in a way, Nielsen rating suggests that, yes, Polish viewers desperately needed local TV fiction.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I was going to ask an audience-related question as well, but this might be more anecdotal response, Sylwia, is about the limitations, like how familiar were the audience about the original program and the Polish version? So, did they know there was the American Everybody Loves Raymond, and did they also know that there was a Polish imitation of it? Like, were they aware of the two programs or not?
What you're talking about, Mita, Everybody Loves Raymond, it was actually a licensed format adaptation. But the thing is that it wasn't, to this day, not many people know that certain shows in Poland are format adaptations. So I wouldn't, obviously my answer is also anecdotal because I haven't done like proper research, but I feel from my conversations with students and basically sort of me being in like part of the Polish audience, I don't think that people are aware that certain shows like Everybody Loves Raymond, the Polish version was a format because it's simply something I feel that Polish audiences tend to be ignorant in a way that simply they don't care. They just want the local product.
Right.
Uh, and that's that. But in terms of Raymond, it was a licensed format adaptation. But in terms of, for example, Polish medical shows, which were clearly influenced by American Grey's Anatomy and others, well, even the sort of critics or journalists, they would basically call these shows Polish Grey's Anatomy, and nobody. But the thing is that ultimately nobody cares. Just
Right.
Polish viewers are just, that's my understanding of these processes, that they just simply don't care. They just want to watch
Yeah.
Polish quality or, high production value shows. And that's that, right? But like I say, I've never conducted audience research and I've never investigated what values Polish viewers are actually projecting onto those shows. So I might be mistaken, but looking at the relative success of these shows, we could assume that simply viewers wanted to watch them, despite the fact they were imitating American shows. Nobody really cares.
Yeah, I found that like really interesting. And also, do you know what? I also hear echoes of the Indian television landscape in what you're talking about with Poland. Because up until the early 90s, India only had one government-owned public TV channel. And it was only after the 1990s, the opening up of markets, neoliberalization of policies, did India start getting more and more programming, so people like international Asian conglomerates started coming into, and American conglomerates started coming to India. So I see this, and I would also agree with it in terms of in India, it's only been since about 2010 are India making, actually I think India's a bit behind in that drama-wise they're making their own programs and have been for a long time. But what they are imitating and the format they are copying is with light entertainment and reality programs. So things like Big Brother, MasterChef, Strictly Come Dancing, they've bought all the international licenses from like BBC and whoever it might be, and are reproducing those products. So yeah, kind of these, licensed local formats are being produced only in the last kind of 10, 15 years in India. So we're kind of, I suppose in some ways, India is a bit behind in some ways, but also, I know you're not talking about light entertainment, but I just see real similarities with the two countries and the way the TV is developed in the two countries. So that was just a comment more than anything. I did that thing where it's like, this is a comment more than a question.
No, actually, can I have a comment to your comment?
Yeah.
Because the thing is that I totally agree with what you said, because Poland is also importing those non-fiction formats, so like non-scripted, right? Like MasterChef and all others, right? But what really interests me in Polish TV production is TV fiction, because it is way more riskier to produce it. It's way more expensive. So in a way, why I love investigating TV fiction, such as TV shows, is simply because it's such a huge investment and such a huge programming risk. And actually, producing a, show for Netflix, or maybe film for Netflix, or a TV show show is so risky because it can actually make or break a company, you know. That's why I feel that for me, TV fiction is so interesting because ultimately it's so important. It's so expensive. There's so much risk involved in fiction production, you know, in terms of production crews and the actual sort of shooting period. There's just so much risks involved. That's why I feel it's so. I feel that all the decisions made by the creators, producers, commissioners, that these decisions are very important and they have like really, you know, important consequences, because I feel that, you know, producing a light entertainment show is not that expensive. You know, you can experiment with it, you can cancel a show, but it's not that expensive. You haven't invest, you know, as a producer, you don't invest all that money, you don't have professional actors more often than not, you know. That's why I just appreciate TV fiction so much, and I find it so exciting to be looking at those processes because I know how important those decisions are, that they can actually make a break or you know, people's careers in a way.
That's really interesting. I didn't consider that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Bianca,
Yeah, I have a question that it's kind of, sorry if I jump in, but it was quite related to, as you was talking about the risks, I was wondering if Netflix, if it is the case that Netflix can be a resource for, because you were talking maybe about, correct me if I'm wrong, but about TV shows, but I was wondering if it could be a resource as a channel for distributing independent films, TV films, because that's very risky from what I understand from what you're saying, that it's really risky, especially for the smaller realities. But can Netflix be, if they're not in the production, can at least be a resource in terms of distribution and, you know, having independent voices heard, let's say, a bit more? Or do you see that, or is it something that it still has to happen? Just curious about it.
Actually, this is something that it has been discussed in the Polish industry, because the problem is that ultimately, like Netflix is obviously a commercial service, right? So they want to produce or distribute shows that are going to be watched, so that Netflix can have a return on on its investment. So there is a lot of talk about how it impacts what is actually being produced, because this is actually why Netflix is being criticized globally, actually, because it is sort of, maybe accused is a strong word, but ultimately Netflix is contributing to this like sudden commercialization of local markets, that in a way they produced commercial high quality content, however they are pushing to the margins this sort of, you know, independent products or artistic projects, right? So in a way, this is actually something that European Union is trying to combat, precisely to allow independent producers and artistic projects to find their way onto the streaming services as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we have Mercy joined us. Mercy, are you able to present your paper? Oh, it's just frozen. Mercy? Hello? There must be some connection issues. Yeah, I think there's connection issues. Okay, well, anyway, Sylwia, I'm going to still, because it's really great, interesting work. And so, right, so my other question was about language on Netflix. How are these productions are these productions only shown on Netflix in Poland, or would I be able to access them here in the UK? And are you aware of how they might be translated, how they're being, like I suppose Netflix hasn't given away audience figures, do they? But like, have you got an idea of how Polish productions are being seen, perhaps in the rest of Europe, in the US, in Asia, South America? I was really also interested the fact that you had the Polish commercial channels were having South American programs on. I was really interested to see that. But anyway, let me go back. So yeah, so how are these productions translating to other parts of the Netflix global market? Do you have any knowledge about that? Any ideas?
Yes, actually, what you mentioned, Mita, is quite important for local producers, and this is also yet another thing they appreciate about Netflix, because all Netflix originals are released, or Polish originals are released immediately into all Netflix's global markets. So a given Polish show doesn't premiere only in Poland, but in 190 international markets at the same time. So in a way that carries an enormous amount of prestige for Polish producers. And this is yet another thing they greatly appreciate about their collaboration with Netflix, because finally, and this is what they actually say, finally, global audiences can see their shows or films, because like I mentioned, historically, Polish TV fiction, well, qualifies as this invisible television, because we never really exported our TV shows because there was no market for it. And suddenly Netflix showed us that there is a business model in which local Polish programming can be seen in foreign markets. And one of the shows, Netflix Polish original shows, that has been immensely popular globally is High Water. So one of the shows I mentioned very briefly in my presentation when I talked about Poland producing VFX heavy shows, because we had this High Water television series that, I don't know, within the first month, after their release, was watched in 10 million homes globally.
Wow, that's really great. This is so good, Sylwia, that I've just got so many things to ask you. I hope you don't mind. Vic, have you got anything else before I
No, go ahead.
Okay. Right. So I know you didn't concentrate on the pre-1989 stuff, but has anybody written? Do you know of any sources that have written about television in Poland, or perhaps in the Soviet Union in Japan? Right. Let me ask you a question. Do you know of anyone who's written about television in Poland during the communist era, or is the writing more generally about television in Soviet Union, not necessarily focusing on a specific state that was part of the Union, if that makes sense? So could you like recommend any readings around that? Because I thought that was like really interesting.
Well, actually, Mita, thank you guys for such great questions. This is just, I could continue talking with you guys for hours. So I'm really.
I think we're going to be like here for the full for the full hour and a half. But yeah, no, please go for it.
No, I'm really enjoying it. So ultimately, right after my PhD in Nottingham, I worked at Loughborough University with Sabina Micheli, and she was running this project called Screening Socialism. And it was a 2-year project, and our team was researching television under socialism in 5 different countries from the Soviet bloc. So I was covering Poland, Alice Bardan was covering Romania, Simon Huxtable covered Germany and Russia, I think, and Sabina researched, I think, former Yugoslavia countries. And the output of their project is a book that Sabina Micheli and Simon Huxtable authored. So I think this is one of the main sources of research on television during the socialist period that does not concentrate on news or politics, because Sabina's project focused on precisely TV fiction and everyday life. So I feel that this project was unique precisely because it didn't look at the propaganda of content or politics in television, but it actually looked at TV fiction, what was being watched, how, what shows were being produced, what ratio of programming was present in TV schedules during that period. And it was actually a fascinating project because I spent weeks, if not months, in Polish archives, just going through TV schedules from 1960s, 70s, 80s. So it was quite daunting, the whole project, but also very interesting because it kind of, it kind of gave me this understanding of what television in the socialist period was. Because ultimately now I focus on a bit more modern sort of, or the here and now. But I feel that knowing and understanding the historical context for development of Polish television, I think it just allows me to be a better researcher, to understand these processes in a historical perspective.
Absolutely. And when did this project happen?
I think the book was published like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can always Google, but yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. Thank you for that. And like you said, like a really good take on, just kind of like moving away from the news and propaganda thing, because that's what tends to be the focus in those kinds of books as well. Like even in Indian TV history articles and books and that, it is very much kind of dominated by the role of the government, and because it was a government channel, it is kind of very much dominated with kind of the Hindu rights and things like that. There's a lot of kind of political analysis of the programs. Going back to Netflix, I'm sorry, I keep flipping from one thing to the other, but going back to Netflix, and again, by all means, I'd be interested to hear anything anecdotal as well, because like you said, I'm an audience person, you see, Sylwia. This is why I keep asking about audiences. How are foreign language, so things like Squid Game and Japanese anime on Netflix, how are they received in Poland? Because I presume you can get them subtitled into Polish or even dubbed into Polish. And I imagine something like Squid Game would have been translated or dubbed, that because it was so big. Like, have you got any kind of, what impression do you have of those kinds of programs being received in Poland? Like, can you give any insight into that, even just from your own experience?
Okay. I kind of mentioned that I'm not conducting audience research, but it's simply because there's just so little time. Yeah, because I find, audiences are essential, right? Because audiences, these are the stakeholders that the producers are actually working for in a way. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that I'm very much sort of interested in audiences, but there's just not enough time to be researching every single aspect. Yeah, but there's actually, I've been talking to Polish scholars that there's just so many fascinating processes happening, because in Poland we don't actually know, because there's no research in Poland on how Polish viewers actually watch TV shows these days. We simply do not know. Obviously, we have some market research, so we have, Nielsen ratings. We have other companies such as Plum Research, for example, that is dedicated solely to researching uh, audience patterns for streaming services. It's actually Plum Research is actually a fascinating company. I'm collaborating with them. They are a Polish startup that is working for American companies, and they are accumulating viewership data globally. Maybe not globally, but from main biggest markets globally. So they actually, their sort of their data comes from a larger number of users. For example, Nielsen in Poland. So in a way, Plum Research is way more representative, I think. So I rely on data they supply me for my research at times. Obviously, this is very expensive, but we do sort of, we have this barter collaboration. So I do have access to some data. So ultimately, I do appreciate audiences, and I feel that this is what is lacking in Polish academia, proper audience research, because Poland was very heavy on pirating, because of the time lag between American premiere and broadcasting in yeah, and broadcasting stream in Poland. So Poland was very big on pirating, and now we simply do not know whether this changed. Did Netflix or other streamers change viewing pattern? Is piracy still part of, Polish viewers' media diet? We simply do not know. So I feel that audience is definitely a niche topic in Poland. And I hope that soon I will be able to address that niche in a way. So, Mita, I kind of forgot your question.
It was just more about like what just from kind of like your experience and maybe your students' experience or your colleagues or your family and friends' experience, how are they receiving the international program offering on Netflix? So the things like Squid Game and Bridgerton and God, what are the other big things that are, like those things, like how are they being received? Yeah, Stranger Things. Oh, there you go. Like, yeah, how are they being received?
Well, so the thing is that I feel that there are a couple of things at play here, because obviously the Polish government is very critical of Netflix, of its programming, but it's welcoming towards Netflix when it comes to investing in Poland, right? So in a way, there's this dichotomy
Yeah.
between what the Polish government is actually doing and what they're actually saying, because Polish representatives of the Polish government have been very critical of the Squid Games and other shows. I think there was one show in which Jesus Christ was gay or something like that, and it was just like so criticized by government representatives, simply because they are very right-wing and conservative. So Netflix is being criticized in this sort of like public discussions, but at the same time, a lot of their shows are just hugely popular. Stranger Things and Bridgerton, like Poland has joined the hype in a way. Squid Games also has been criticized, right? For I don't know, for it being just kind of detrimental to young people, young adults' mental health and whatnot, right? But ultimately, yeah, like Netflix is the most popular streaming service in Poland. Obviously, we don't have exact numbers, but say Nielsen assesses Netflix subscribers in Poland at roughly 3 million, which is maybe not a lot, but like I said, Polish market is not yet saturated.
Yeah.
So in a way, there is still room for growth. When we compare the main streaming services, like Netflix is way ahead. It's way ahead of HBO, Sky Showtime, even Disney, I think. Disney launched just like a couple of months ago, or maybe.
Like, do you know when people, like other streaming sites, are thinking about tapping into, like if Disney are only a couple of months old? Yeah.
They are all beginning to produce locally. None of the other streamers have ever anything released yet, but from the industry sort of like vibe and gossip is that they are producing. They are looking for scripts and they're basically doing it. So they're following Netflix's business model and they're going to be producing. So in a way, I know that this streaming bubble is kind of bursting globally, but Poland hasn't yet experienced such sudden decrease in financing. And I think this is because we are still kind of like a market in which Netflix feels they can, make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, because looking at the figures that you mentioned, that you put in your slides, I saw a tiny slice of Europe programs in the graph, and I was wondering if you could tell more about if you have any insights, because I know that, I mean, you've demonstrated quite interestingly the influence of the US market and all of that, and Netflix, etc. But I was curious about the influence of European productions on practitioners or on the creative side, or whatever you have on thoughts, impressions on the influence coming from smaller markets, but still quite creative. So what? I mean, of course, I'm speaking geographically, so to include British production, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, historically, European programming does not travel well in Poland. So, in a way, Polish broadcasters in the 1990s or early, first decade of 21st century, they did experiment with importing French or German TV shows or even Eastern European shows, but it's simply, people didn't want to watch it simply, so they just gave up. That's why in my sort of those graphs and my figures, European programming does not feature at all, simply because it was not imported. In a way, European programming or European films are discussed as sort of within this festival circuit. So you can watch them at various festivals. They obviously have certain prestige, a lot of film critics, enjoy watching them. So it's part of sort of positioning themselves as sort of film critics of, within art sector. But if you look at the mainstream audience or mainstream linear broadcasters, European programming is basically non-existent. So whatever I don't actually research festivals or festival circuit. This is not my area of expertise, but my sort of anecdotal sort of reading of this is that it's sort of pushed towards margins as niche, as part of this artistic prestige. I happen to research people, so practitioners working in the mainstream sector, so working for Netflix or commercial broadcasters, commercial legacy broadcasters. So within this particular sector, European programming is almost never mentioned. The only sort of example of a British show that has been talked about, that had this sort of vibe, was Sherlock, obviously.
Oh, right, okay. Interesting. Wow. That's really interesting.
Does it have an adaptation as the shows you mentioned before, or I mean, is there a Polish Sherlock, or that's proper Sherlock, like the original.
Was it like a translated or dubbed version, or was it an imitated version? I think that's what we.
Yeah, exactly.
No, the thing is that we didn't have adaptations or imitation up until recently, where there was a show that premiered last year on a commercial broadcaster that is precisely about two investigators, one of them being a woman and the other one, a guy, is sort of on the spectrum of, so he's demonstrating some qualities of, Asperger's or, on the spectrum of autism. So in a sense, he is this quirky yet brilliant detective. So I haven't researched that show, but this is closest to Polish incarnation of Sherlock, I'd say. So, and also I want to add one thing that within the Polish Academy, what is being written about, what is the main sort of source of interest for Polish scholars is mainly American programming, so American TV shows, American quality TV shows like Game of Thrones and things like that. And the only non-American programming that I came across being written about was Sherlock. And the article discussed Sherlock as a quality television. But apart from that, British television is not really visible, I'd say. But this is just my impression, as I am not really researching the circulation of European programming in Poland. So I might be mistaken here, but nothing sort of, popped up recently as this, successful British show in this main public narrative.
Because, what's really interesting? Because when you were talking about the imitation and things like that, I wrote down how Americans are imitating and adapting British programs. So things like House of Cards on Netflix, or that was like one of Netflix's really early big blockbusters. Sorry if I'm patronising and you know all this already. Was imitating a very old British program called Yes, Prime Minister from kind of the late 80s, early 90s. So it's kind of an updating, but also like revamping of that. But then you've also got before Netflix, you had, the adaptation of The Office and Shameless, those British programs that the Americans took over and remade as well. And obviously, Homeland. So it's not just British television that the Americans are borrowing and stealing from, but there's also, these European and Asian programs as well. So there is kind of almost 2-3-way kind of circle of imitation going on, I think, across the television sphere. But it was interesting to hear about it kind of happening in Poland. So yeah, that was just another little comment that I kind of wanted to make. But I think I have finished my questioning of you and commenting on your work, Sylwia. That was really great. Thank you so much. Bianca, is there anything else?
No, that was great. That was absolutely a beautiful dive into something I'm really not familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with some Polish films, but again, so as you were saying, so at festivals, contexts. So again, I would love to see more of that, even without. And I'm going to search for some good shows on Polish shows on Netflix now that you mentioned that they're quite available everywhere in the world. So
yeah, you could totally watch all the shows that I mentioned about sexually conscious teenagers. That one is called Sexify, and the one that is a completely new genre in Poland was A Girl and a Cosmonaut. It was actually like one of the very few Polish sci-fi shows, and also I think it's really worth recommending High Water. This is like a very VFX heavy show. The budget for this show was just incredible, like enormous. It was one of the most expensive TV shows ever made. So yeah, I think it's really great that now when presenting at conferences, you can actually recommend shows that people might have a chance to watch, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to, access these shows. And these shows are translated or dubbed in English, so it's accessible to all.
Yeah, like this is. I'm writing it all down. There's a colleague here at the conference who's walking around with a notebook, and every time somebody mentions something, is like writing down the.
We'll have to share that.
Well, yeah, I did say she needs to take a picture of that list and then share it with everybody at the conference. Yeah. Mercy, right? Are you with us, Mercy? She's gone again. Oh. Yeah, connect, and we don't really have much time left.
No, exactly.
I don't know. I think I'm going to make a chair's decision and maybe just kind of give it a close. Let's bring it to an end. Thank you so much, Sylwia. That was like, you got bombarded with lots of comments and questions there, and I think you handled it absolutely brilliantly. Well done. Really interesting paper. And maybe we'll see you again in person at some point. I hope things get better for you.
Thank you. Thanks for a lovely discussion. It was really great speaking to you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Hopefully we'll see you at other panels as well throughout the day, maybe at the keynote as well. So again, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.